forward. What is
Good afternoon, Earth.
Well, I think what it is it's actually information.
This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting red. Third in the primary triptych. Alright, still continuing with glob detail. This one is taking a lot longer than I had anticipated. I like these color studies because they're evolving in ways that I hadn't really anticipated, and they're a lot of fun. But this one is starting to be a little bit like Mercurial Mine, an old drawing I did, and it's getting kind of on the complex side. So after this layer of red, I intend on doing a layer of reddish pink for a highlight, and then white on top of that, then some deep tones on top of that to increase the reflectivity and shadows and lights of all of the globs. But so far, we're about 2/3 of the way through the first application of light red, so we're going to continue with that and work on the bottom portion. I think I've got all the globs in the upper part done, so it's safe to zoom in on this lower area where I'm going to be working right now.
For another time, degrees of sentience in operating systems. So then it seems to mean that information is the thing.
I move the camera to the side, so hopefully there won't be so much of my back in this
uses spirit,
session.
uses whatever it can put its hands on to organize itself
Spin
into
this
higher and
just a
higher
little
levels
bit more.
of self-reflection. Well, then
go.
to what end? I mean, what is all this? Is it just an innate drive toward totality? Or is it a process which exists completed in some higher dimensional space, and we are somehow trapped in a lower dimensional matrix, and we have to endure the illusion that it is incomplete? I mean, I don't have answers for these things. This is the business of theologians, basically, to tell us where we are in this universal machine. But I think that what we can do to enrich our experience and to feed data into our heuristic models is to begin to think in terms of language as the material that we need to work with, instead of public opinion or matter or even energy. It's meaning that we need to coax into our lives. Number one, as meaning enters our lives individually, we become more capable of raising our voices, both in joyous song and in political protest, if necessary. My whole shtick, and the whole shtick of the psychedelic experience, I think, is reclaim immediate experience. Realize that you outvote all parliaments, police forces, and major newspapers on the planet. Because, who knows, they may be illusions. Complicated phenomenological forms of analysis can be carried out to show that their existence is in considerable doubt. But if you carry out this phenomenological reduction, you will discover that it reinforces the notion that you must actually exist and be real. So therefore, you start from that nub of immediate experience and real being, and extrapolation outward should be very provisional. I mean, I don't know how Buddhism handles this. I grant you all a strong possibility of existing, but I'm not nearly as sure about you as I am about me. And I don't think any of you should be more sure of the rest of us than yourself. I mean, the world could be anything, you know? It could be a solid state matrix of some sort. It could be an illusion. It could be a dream. I mean, it really could be a dream. So it pays to stay on your toes, I think. In practical terms, what does all this come down to, besides that we should speak from the heart, clearly, and with our minds engaged? Well, I think that, remember I said we should see language as the stuff with which we work rather than matter. And that means creating a technology of the sayable, making the complete understanding of new puns a national priority on a par with weapons development. It means exploring the real implications of substituting Finnegan's Wake for the Constitution, this sort of thing. Because what we're doing, you see, is pulling the beard of the linear printheads who really believe all of this stuff, who really are lost in the labyrinth of the political errors of the last 500 years. It isn't going, we can't overwhelm them by force of arms, nor should we wish to. They can actually be teased out of existence because they themselves feel their position to be so ridiculous. It's very interesting how the way the collapse of our enemy in the Soviet Union has exposed the absurdity of our previous positions. All our previous positions are now exposed as absurd, but people don't draw the obvious conclusion. It must also mean then that our present position is absurd. And so it's tremendously liberating. Our culture is ruined. It's a disgrace from which we can now simply walk away. Well, then the question is, into what? And I believe that our persistent fascination with psychedelic states of mind since prehistory forward has been because in the psychedelic state, from the very beginning, there was an anticipation of the very end. And the very end still lies ahead of us. What it is that our nervous system is in the process of evolving us through a linguistic transformation where language, which at the beginning of the process was something that you heard, at the end of the process becomes something that you actually see. And this simple shift from seeing to hearing is the key to our being able to finally recognize each other and communicate. Print and linearity and what's called ear bias for language is what has shattered our sense of ourselves as a collectivity. A positive way of putting it is to say it's also what created the idea of democracy, individual freedom, labor unions, the vote. All of these atomized notions of human obligation and political participation arise out of print. But so do ideas like that we're all alike, because letters from printing presses on pages are all alike. The idea that products should be mass-produced out of mass-produced subunits. This is a printhead notion. It could never have occurred to anyone outside of a printing press culture and never has. These ideas have imparted to our existence a tremendous material opulence and intellectual poverty and spiritual uniformity. And now, literally, we have to illuminate our civilization. We have to take its shoddy, spiritually empty Bauhaus skeleton and illuminate it, psychedelicize it, let 1,000 paisleys bloom. In other words, release the design process from a commitment to material values. Well, how can you do that? Because the bottom line of material values is the bottom line. It costs. The reason we build in the Bauhaus style, for whatever reason we got into it, we now build in that style because it's the cheapest around. And once you start adding filigrees and changing things, costs soar. How can you do that in a civilization with a cult of democratic values, individualism, and print-created linear uniformity. Well, the only way you can do it is you have to drop design costs to zero. The only way you can do that is if you build virtually. This means you build in an electronic dimension that is added on to ordinary cultural space like an orthogonal dimension. In other words, it's like a TV that you walk into. It's called cyberspace. And in cyberspace, things are built out of light. So it costs as much to build Versailles as it costs to build a hamburger stand, because Versailles and the hamburger stand are just two programs that look exactly the same on disk. So what this means is that the previous set of class-created values based on the acquisition and control of matter begin to break down. This is already happening in America on one level, where, to live as a middle-class person is to live at a better level than the Mughal emperors ever dreamed of. I mean, what Mughal emperor could stride to his refrigerator and see cases of French mineral water, juices from the South Seas, pomegranates from South America? Eat your heart out, Mughal Delhi. No chance. So, in a sense, we're beginning to create this leveling, but we have created it by looting the material resources of the rest of the world. Conceivably, it can be created in a virtual space where we would all live in this world, a rather monkish existence. But, there's that wonderful passage in Finian's Wake where he says, he's speaking of the red light district of Dublin, which is called Moycane. And he says, here in Moycane we flop on the seamy side, but up in the end, prospector, you sprout all your worth and you woof your wings. If you want to be phoenixed, come and be parked. Well, he was advocating death as a solution to life's problems. If you want to be phoenixed, come and be parked. My solution is not so radical. I think if you want to be phoenixed, come and be parked at your local virtual reality arcade. And then you can be phoenixed in several ways. Well, some of what I'm saying here is facetious. We talked last night about Stan Tenon's wonderful object. For those of you who weren't here, this is a man, a Kabbalistic scholar, who has developed a piece of sculpture such that when you illuminate it from a certain angle, the Hebrew letter Aleph appears as a shadow. And then you move the light slightly, and Aleph turns into Bet. And then you move the light slightly, and so on. In order, his sculpture produces all of the Hebrew letters as shadows from this beautiful form, which he calls the lily. And it ties in with an experience that I had. But, well, first let me talk a little bit more about this lily thing that Tenon has discovered. He also made one for Demotic Greek, which, for those of us who thought it was proof positive that Hebrew was the language of God, this was a real blow to the chest. But because he did one for Demotic Greek, too, and it works just as well, implying, and I was working on Arabic, implying that perhaps such forms exist for all alphabets. And so then I was thinking about this last night, and I said, well, if there's a sculpture in 3 dimensions that throws the two-dimensional alphabets, then obviously in a higher dimension there must be a form which throws into lower dimensions the sculptures that make the alphabet. So that means all alphabets, all letters lead back to a hyperdimensional surface of some sort, which can probably then be described with some kind of weird fractal algorithm. And so then I thought, wow, this is a pretty Hebraic vision of what's going on here. We have the alphabets of local languages being generated from higher dimensional objects that are three-dimensional, that are then referent to still higher dimensional objects, that through which the light of God's love passes, scattering out into the radiance of what can be said. And in a way, this is sort of my vision of the millennium, that we will be resorbed into the Word. You know, the whole story begins in principio et verbum et verbo caro factum est. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. The whole cosmic drama is the mystery of what it is for the Word to be made flesh. Language is seeking to birth itself into the domain of concrete existence. That's obviously what the Word made flesh means. And it seems to me that if the Word can be made flesh, this implies a reciprocity. It implies that the flesh can be made Word. And this brings us back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of this evening, which is the curiously literary nature of reality. That it's much more like a novel by Thomas Pynchon than it is like an equation by Ilya Prigogine. And why is that? Is it because, in fact, the flesh is Word, and that understanding this is the real task of uncovering our spirituality? Somehow it's a riddle, it's a conundrum, it's a koan. If we could correctly understand this, if the world did not disappear immediately, at least it would roll around in the palm of your hand like a spinning marble, as the I Ching promises. It's something about the recognition of the primacy of the Word, that history is the process of the descent of the Word into concrete expression. I didn't say matter. And that our relation to this retroflexive process is an ascent into the Word, a going toward the approaching mystery, and a meeting there in a domain of unknowability. Essentially, I mean, this is the casting into being that Heidegger talked about. This is the going to meet the stranger. This is the flight of the alone to the alone that is the driving force of Plotinus's mysticism. Well, that's really all I have to say about that. So let me see what kind of, how am I doing? Yeah, let's take some questions if there are any.
Do you know how to use Amenides muscaria medicinally and shamanistically without killing yourself?
I can tell you were following my argument with bated breath. Carefully, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it's seasonally variable, geographically variable, and genetically variable. And that's enough variables that you should be very careful with what you're doing. Generally, I don't recommend it. It's the attention that has been given to that mushroom is, to my mind, entirely out of proportion to its cultural importance. This is because Gordon Wasson fastened in on it with a tenacious will as soma. He decided that it was soma. Are you all up to speed on what we're talking about here? Soma was this mysterious, ecstatic, hallucinogenic plant that the Rig Vedas were basically composed about. The major subject of the Rig Vedas is Soma. The 9th mandala of the Rig Veda is a paean of praise to Soma, that it exalts it above all the other gods. And no one knows what Soma was. And the descriptions are puzzling. It seems to have been, it didn't have leaves. It had yellow flowers. It grew in the mountains. And they speak of pressing it. It was prepared some way. It was pressed. It was filtered. And then they talk about this golden liquid which they drank. And Gordon Wasson, because of the importance of the Indo-Aryan people who wrote the Vedas for connecting up all of the history of what archaeologists call Old Europe with the Neolithic Middle East and India. It was very important to try and understand what Soma was. But the problem that has bedeviled everyone who was an enthusiast for Amanita muscaria as Soma is that it's a bad tree. It is not reliably an ecstatic intoxicant. In fact, it's fairly reliably a bellyache. And people have pounded it with milk curd. There was a whole school of thought which said that the enzymes active in raw milk would decarboxylate muscarine, the poison, into muscimol, the hallucinogen. But, you know, this didn't stand the test of human trials. It didn't appear to be true. Then other people said you have to dry them for months or smoke them over a fire. Again, this doesn't seem to be reliable. So Wasson went to the grave. He, in his last book, Persephone's Quest, he referred to Amanita muscaria as the supreme entheogen of all time, which was just a completely wrong-headed judgment, I believe. And this was from the man who discovered the true psilocybin mushroom cult in Mexico. There was an angle on all this which Watson completely overlooked because of his bias towards certain languages, and that is that along with all this Indo-European Vedic Hindu material, there was a Zend-Avestan literature based around Homa, the same stuff, same word. And from there, Flattery argues that it was Pagamen harmala, that it was harmaline, that it was not a mushroom, that it was a higher plant in the Zygophalaceae. And I think probably he's right, actually. It's a very interesting book. Apparently, in the Avestan classical period, no one would have dreamed of having a spiritual experience without resort to drugs. They just put it very plainly. They're the most matter-of-fact people. These texts are fascinating. But they don't devalue it. They say, you know, here's our map of the spirit world entirely based on our drug experiences, and here are the drugs we use, and to see these angels you must use this drug, and to see these angels this drug, and so forth. We don't really know what these drugs were because the etymologies are lost. But harmaline figures very strongly in all of this, and of course harmaline is a neurotransmitter present in human metabolism. In fact, I didn't get into it tonight because I was trying to keep it off the biochemistry and that sort of thing, but this transformation of language from something heard to seen that I was talking about, I believe is a 1 or 2 gene mutation. That's all it would take, because in the human pineal gland there is a compound called adenosine. That's what the enzymologists call it. But when you show it to a plant biochemist, he says it's 6-methoxy-tetrahydroharmalan, and so it is. Adenosine and 6-methoxy-tetrahydroharmalan are the same thing. Well, it's a psychedelic harmine alkaloid, similar to what's in Pagamen harmala. It could be converted to DMT by a simple methylation. Well, a 1 gene mutation would make a methylation possible. Attention, consciousness, cultural values, we don't know how many times since the invention of language there have been significant mutations in the chemistry of the nervous system that have created significant changes in cultural programming. I mean, doesn't anyone find it a little odd that the laws of perspective were discovered less than 400 years ago? I mean, what the hell was wrong with people before that? How can you discover the laws of perspective? I mean, I find that not credible for somebody to say that the laws of perspective were discovered. It's always seemed weird to me. It's as though there was a shift, a very subtle tweaking of the processing of visual space itself necessary to be able to do that, yeah.
You've spoken about the Word and the Word made flesh, and Dorothy Sayers wrote a book called The Mind of the Maker, in which she discusses the Trinity as really an image of what the creative process is all about. And where the Father is having like a great idea for a play, is the Father. The Son is
Alright, just about ran out the memory segment.
Bringing it into the world and having it made flesh.
But
And then the
I think that gets most of the lower portion, the first layer, pretty nicely in place.
And how all three of them
So,
really beget one another
zoom
and
out
nurture
here,
one another.
get square.
And she talks about people who have these
That
problems
ends it for
scaling
this
trinities,
session.
where there's someone, let's say they have only the Father, only have a great idea, but be unable to make it into something that's physically...
Alright, so that's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting red, third in the primary triptych. Have a good night.
I think if you think of history as this kind of a process,